If you had told me a week ago that a storm knocking out the power all night would end up being the best thing that ever happened to me, I probably would have laughed and told you to lay off the caffeine. But here I am, sitting in near darkness, the only light coming from my phone's dim screen, and honestly, I don't think I've felt this alive in years. So this all started last Friday. The weather forecast warned of a pretty nasty storm rolling through my town, and I thought, great, another weekend cooped up inside. I was ready for a quiet night binge-watching whatever trashy series was trending, with my usual companion, a mountain of takeout. But then the power cut out around 8 p.m., and everything changed. I live in this older apartment complex. Nothing fancy, but it's home. The kind of place where the walls are a little thin, and you can hear the neighbors arguing about their dogs' chewing habits at 3 a.m. Normally, when the power goes out, it's for a few minutes, maybe an hour tops. But not this time. The storm was relentless, howling winds, thunder crashing like the sky was breaking apart, and rain pounding so hard it felt like the building was shaking. No lights, no internet, no Netflix. Just silence, intermittently broken by the storm's fury. I was sitting on my couch, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, debating whether to just crawl into bed and wait it out. That's when my doorbell rang. Yeah, I know. Doorbell during a blackout in a storm? Not something you hear every day. I was about to ignore it, thinking maybe one of the neighbors needed help or something, but then I heard a voice, soft, kind of hesitant, but unmistakably familiar. Hey, sorry to bother you. My apartment's flooded, and the power's out everywhere. Can I come in for a bit? It was Matt, my neighbor from across the hall. I'd seen him a few times, always polite but quiet. We'd never really talked beyond the usual, hi, how's it going type of thing. I'd always thought he was cute, but life happens and you don't just randomly knock on a neighbor's door, especially when it's pouring outside. Still, there he was, dripping wet, looking like he escaped a rain-soaked nightmare. And honestly, my apartment suddenly felt a lot less empty. I gestured him inside, grabbed a towel from my bathroom, and we settled on the couch, the storm's soundtrack filling the silence between us. No distractions, no phones buzzing. Just two guys stuck in the dark, forced to talk. What started as small talk about the storm and broken elevators somehow veered into stories about his childhood, his failed attempts at cooking, and the music he was obsessed with right now. I told him about my job at the bookstore, the dumb mistakes I'd made, and how I'd been feeling kind of stuck lately. There was something about the dim light, the rain drumming on the windows, that made everything feel more honest, more real. Hours passed. We lost track of time. At some point, I realized I hadn't glanced at my phone once. And then, just as I was beginning to wonder if the lights would ever come back on, Matt leaned over and said, this might be the most interesting night I've had in a long time. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. The way the shadows played across his face, the way his eyes caught that tiny flicker of candlelight I'd found in a kitchen drawer. I couldn't help but agree. That's when the power finally flickered back on, blasting the room with harsh, artificial light. But somehow, I didn't want the electricity to come back. Not yet, because in the dark, with the storm raging outside, I'd found something I hadn't realized I was looking for. And I have a feeling that night was just the beginning. When the lights came back on, it was like someone had turned on a spotlight in a theater during the quietest, most intimate scene. The sudden brightness felt intrusive, almost jarring after hours of soft shadows and whispered stories. Matt frowned, shielding his eyes for a moment, and I found myself wishing the power outage would just stay gone a little longer. But reality crept back in with the hum of the fridge and the glow of my laptop screen. I glanced over at Matt, who was still sitting beside me, now blinking in the light like a cat caught outside during the day. I realized I hadn't asked him how his apartment was holding up in the storm. So how bad was the flooding? I asked, trying to fill the sudden void the darkness left behind. He shrugged, tucking a wet strand of hair behind his ear. Not terrible, but the ceiling started leaking near the bathroom. I figured it was safer here than trying to mop up in the dark. Plus, I wasn't about to deal with a broken heater in the middle of this mess. I nodded. understanding all too well how these old buildings could turn a bad storm into a small disaster. "Glad you made it over," I said, a little more sincerely than I intended. There was an awkward silence that felt heavier than before, like we'd both noticed something shifting. Matt cleared his throat and then said, "You know, I didn't think I'd enjoy this blackout. Usually, I hate being cut off from everything. But tonight, it's weirdly nice. Like, it forced me to slow down." I laughed softly. "Yeah, for socializing with a stranger in the middle of a storm. Definitely not my usual Friday night." He smiled, that easy, genuine kind that made me want to keep looking at him. "Not a stranger anymore, right?" "Right," I said, feeling a little warm inside. There was something about how natural the conversation felt, how comfortable it was to just be there with him without any pretenses. We ended up talking until midnight, sharing stories that somehow ranged from hilarious disasters at work to the weirdest dates we'd been on. I found out Matt had a dry sense of humor that perfectly balanced my tendency to overthink. He listened when I talked about my bookstore job, asking questions that showed he cared. At one point, he made this joke about how storm-induced power outages should be mandatory for people who live on their phones, and I laughed so hard I almost spilled the half-empty bottle of water I'd grabbed earlier. By the time the storm's noise faded into a distant drizzle, the apartment felt less like just a place to crash and more like the sort of space where something unexpected could happen. I was aware of every little movement he made, the way he brushed his fingers over the fabric of the couch, how his eyes lingered a fraction longer when he looked at me. It was late, or maybe early morning by then, and I was about to suggest he stay the night when he beat me to it. "If you don't mind, I think I'm going to crash here. The elevator's probably still down, and it's too wet to walk back." "Of course," I said without hesitation. I wasn't some guy who usually had overnight guests, but with Matt it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We moved to the spare bedroom, an awkward little space I'd barely furnished. He flopped onto the bed with a tired sigh, and I noticed how vulnerable he looked, his damp jacket folded neatly beside him. "Thanks for letting me crash," he said quietly. "No problem," I replied. "Honestly, I'm glad you came over." We lay in silence for a few minutes, the gentle patter of rain still audible through the window. I felt his presence across the room, close but not quite close enough. Then, suddenly, he spoke again. "You know, I was worried tonight would be boring, but meeting you, it's been the highlight of my week." My heart thudded in a way that surprised me. I glanced over and saw him looking at me, this sincere, almost shy expression that made me want to close the distance between us right then and there. But I held back because it felt like something delicate was unfolding, something that needed time. "Same here," I said honestly. We fell asleep to the sound of the storm finally dying down, the kind of sleep that's soft and weighted with hope. Over the next few days, the blackout became this shared secret between us. We kept bumping into each other in the hallway, exchanging smiles that lingered a little too long. I found myself texting him, something I hadn't done with anyone in a long time. One afternoon, he invited me to grab coffee at this little place down the street, one that had somehow stayed open despite the storm's aftermath. Sitting across from him, warm cup in hand, I realized how much I wanted to learn everything about this guy, who somehow turned a crappy night into something I couldn't stop thinking about. And honestly, I'm pretty sure he feels the same way. Because sometimes, it takes a storm to make you see the light in someone else. The coffee shop was this cozy little spot with exposed brick walls and a scattering of mismatched chairs that made it feel more like someone's living room than a business. The kind of place where you could spend hours pretending you were a novelist struggling with a deadline, even if all you were really doing was scrolling through your phone. Matt seemed to know the place well. He ordered a black coffee like he was a regular, while I stuck with my safer caramel latte. We sat by the window, watching the street slowly dry out from the storm, people shuffling by with soggy umbrellas and cautious smiles. The city smelled fresh, like everything had been rinsed clean and was ready to start over. It felt almost symbolic, like maybe so were we. "So," Matt said, stirring his coffee absently, "what's your story? Like, beyond books and power outages? What's the real you?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to share, but because it felt like I'd been hiding behind the usual small talk for so long that spilling the truth was kind of scary. But he was looking at me with that patient, steady gaze, the kind that makes it hard to lie. Well, I guess I've been feeling stuck. Not in a bad way, just like I'm in this routine that's comfortable, but kind of hollow. Work, come home, watch TV, repeat. I don't really have anyone I'd call close, you know? Friends are scattered, and dating has been, well, underwhelming. Matt nodded like he'd been there too. Yeah, I get that. It's easy to get caught in that loop and forget what it feels like to take a real chance. There it was, the phrase that hit a nerve. Real chance. I realized that night, during the blackout, was a chance I hadn't expected to get. A chance to connect, to be seen. So what about you? I asked. What's your story? He smiled, a little wistful. I'm a graphic designer. Freelance mostly, which means my schedule's all over the place. Kinda lonely sometimes, but I like the freedom. I moved here a couple years ago, hoping for a fresh start after a rough breakup. I felt my stomach twist a bit. Breakups are messy, and hearing that he was coming out of one made the idea of us even more fragile. But I didn't want to pull back. I wanted to know more. Anything you want to share about that breakup? I asked carefully. Matt shrugged, looking down at his coffee. It was complicated. We were together for almost 3 years. I thought it was forever, but sometimes people just grow apart even if they don't want to. It pleased Miss, but I'm okay now. There was honesty in his voice that made me want to reach across the table and tell him everything would be all right. Instead, I reached for his hand, not in some dramatic movie scene way. Just a simple, I'm here if you want to talk, kind of gesture. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around mine, and I felt this spark, something warm and real that had nothing to do with the storm outside. We left the coffee shop a couple hours later, the sky now clear and the air crisp. Walking back to the apartment, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath with us. When we got back, the hallways were quiet. I turned to him and said, I'm glad you knocked on my door that night. He smiled, that shy, easy grin that had me wanting more. Me too. We stood there for a moment, the kind of silence that's full of possibility. Then, out of nowhere, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft and tentative, but electric. Like the kind of kiss that sneaks up on you and leaves you wondering how you ever lived without it. I kissed him back, feeling all the walls I'd built up start to crumble. When we pulled apart, breathless and laughing, he whispered, So about that storm, you think it's done messing with us? I grinned, knowing full well that whatever came next, it was only just beginning. After that kiss in the hallway, everything suddenly felt both thrilling and terrifying all at once. I mean, I'd always thought of Matt as this nice, quiet neighbor, someone I'd occasionally nod at, but never really imagined sharing anything deeper with. Yet here we were, standing close enough that I could smell the faint scent of rain still clinging to him, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. So, I said, trying to sound casual even though my voice probably cracked, What happens now? He grinned that crooked smile of his and shrugged. I guess we figure it out, one step at a time. That was the honest truth. Neither of us had a script for this, no roadmap for turning a chance meeting during a blackout into something real. But somehow, that made it better. Less pressure, more. Whatever this was. We decided to head back to my apartment instead of going our separate ways. The idea of saying goodbye felt too final, like closing a book you weren't ready to finish. Inside, the place still smelled faintly like wet coats and rain, but now it also had this new warmth, like the space had been waiting for something to change. I grabbed a couple of candles and lit them, the soft flicker casting gentle shadows across the walls. We sank onto the couch, closer than before, and just talked. Not just about the storm or our jobs, but the little things that usually get left out. The music that got us through bad days, the books that changed our perspective, the dreams we'd stuffed away because life got in the way. I told him about my terrible attempts to learn guitar as a kid, which ended with me almost breaking the strings more often than not. Matt laughed so hard I thought he might snort coffee through his nose. And then he told me about his obsession with old-school cartoons, like he'd never quite grown out of them. At some point, the conversation dipped into that awkward territory, where you're both silently wondering if you should say something, but unsure if the other person feels the same. I could feel the tension build, the space between us charged with unspoken questions. Then, without really thinking, I reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind his ear. His eyes flickered down to my hand, and when they met mine again, there was this softness there that made my heart skip. "Can I kiss you again?" I asked, half joking, but completely serious. His answer was a smile, slow and sweet, and then his lips were on mine, more certain this time. The world outside faded into background noise, the distant hum of traffic, the quiet flicker of candlelight. None of it mattered. We pulled apart just enough to catch our breath, and I found myself grinning like a fool. "I'm really glad that storm knocked out the power," Matt said, his voice low. "Me too." "Me too." I agreed. Over the next few days, we fell into this easy rhythm. Texting, sharing playlists, grabbing late-night slices of pizza that neither of us really needed but both craved. There was no rush, no pressure to define what we were. Just two guys who found something unexpected in a darkened apartment during a storm. One evening, Matt invited me over to his place for dinner. He was surprisingly good in the kitchen. Who knew? We cooked together, laughing over burnt garlic bread and the fact that neither of us could properly dice an onion without shedding tears. The apartment was filled with the scent of herbs and something warm and homey, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. After dinner, we sprawled on his couch, the glow from the city lights filtering through the window. He tucked his head into my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around him, feeling like this was exactly where I was meant to be. "Do you think we're rushing things?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be." He looked up at me, eyes shining. "I'm scared sometimes, you know? About what this means, about opening up again." "Me too," I admitted, "but I think it's worth it." Those words felt like a promise, both to him and to myself. A couple of weeks later, we found ourselves back in the hallway of our apartment complex. The storm had long passed, replaced by the steady hum of everyday life. But standing there with Matt, I realized that the real storm, the one that changed everything, was just beginning. And honestly, I can't wait to see where it takes us. After that night in the hallway, something shifted between us, subtle but undeniable. For the first time in forever, I felt like I wasn't just drifting through my days, waiting for something to happen. With Matt, it felt like something already was. We settled into this slow, easy groove. Nothing dramatic, just small moments that made me realize how much I'd missed having someone close. Like that Thursday when I found him sitting on the fire escape outside my window, headphones on, sketching in that little notebook he carries around. I tapped on the glass, and he looked up, surprised but smiling. I climbed out to join him, and we sat there, side by side, watching the city lights flicker beneath us. No words, just the quiet hum of life and the faint scratch of pencil on paper. That's when I noticed the drawing, a rough sketch of my apartment building, but with two little stick figures holding hands on the fire escape. I caught his eye and grinned, and he gave me this shy shrug like, "What can I say? You're inspiring." Moments like that made my chest tighten in a good way. Like my whole world had expanded just by having him in it. But of course, life isn't all quiet nights and stolen sketches. About a week later, we hit our first real bump. It started one evening when Matt came over after work, looking unusually tense. He sat down on the couch but didn't say much, just staring at his hands like he was wrestling with something. "Hey," I said gently. "You okay?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I guess. Work's been a nightmare. The client I'm designing for keeps changing the specs every 5 minutes, and it's driving me nuts." I nodded, knowing how frustrating that could be. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated, then gave me a small smile. "Thanks, but I'm not great at unloading. I don't want to bring you down after such a good week." There it was, the classic Matt downplaying his own stress, trying to keep things light even when they weren't. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to pretend with me." He looked at me, eyes shining with something raw and real. "I know. I'm just scared sometimes. Scared of messing this up. Of getting too close and then, I don't know, losing it all." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd felt my own share of doubts and fears, but hearing it from him made it so much more real. We're not perfect, I said softly, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. I'm here, Matt. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled, a little shaky but genuine. Thanks. That means a lot. We spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, talking through fears and hopes, drawing closer in a way that felt like healing. Then came the weekend, bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows. Matt invited me over for brunch, promising to cook, a bold claim considering his track record in the kitchen. I arrived to find him surrounded by a mess of ingredients and a smoke detector blaring like an angry banshee. We laughed, teamed up to salvage what we could, and ended up with something edible that tasted better because we made it together. As we sat eating, the conversation turned lighter, teasing and easy, until he suddenly looked at me with that look, the one that makes your stomach flip. "Can I ask you something a bit crazy?" he said. "Bring it on," I replied, grinning. He hesitated, then blurted out, "Would you want to go on a real date with me? Like, not just hanging out in apartments or fire escapes, but out there. You and me, Friday night, dinner and maybe a movie?" I blinked, a little stunned. After everything, here was Matt, asking me out like a real grown-up guy. "I'd love that," I said without hesitation. His face lit up, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. We planned the date right then and there, excitement bubbling between us. Friday came faster than I expected. I found myself pacing in front of the mirror, trying to decide if my outfit was too casual or too much. When Matt showed up, looking effortlessly handsome, all my doubts melted away. We went to this little Italian place downtown, the kind with dim lighting and red checkered tablecloths. Over wine and pasta, the conversation flowed easily, laughter mixing with moments of quiet connection. After dinner, we walked through the city streets, the air crisp but not cold, hands brushing until he finally took mine. We didn't rush anything. No grand declarations, no fireworks. Just two people, stepping forward together. By the time we said goodnight, I knew this was something real, something I wanted to hold on to. As I walked back to my apartment, the city buzzing softly around me, I realized that sometimes the best storms don't come from the weather. They come from the unexpected, messy, beautiful chaos of opening your heart. And this time, I was ready for whatever came next. The days after that first proper date with Matt felt like I was walking on this weird, buoyant cloud, like my whole body was humming a little tune that only we knew. I kept catching myself smiling at nothing, waiting for a text or a message that would start another conversation, another moment shared between us. And more often than not, it did. We slipped into this rhythm that was both new and familiar. Texts in the middle of the day, casual plans that somehow turned into long nights, talking over cheap takeout, or wandering the neighborhood parks until the streetlights flickered off. The ordinary felt extraordinary when he was around. But, of course, nothing worth having ever moves in a straight line. One Thursday evening, I was at the bookstore, stacking some new arrivals, when my phone buzzed with a message from Matt. His tone was lighter than usual, but I could tell something was off. "Hey, can we talk tonight?" Something's been on my mind. My chest tightened, and I knew I couldn't just brush it off. I replied immediately, "Of course. Want to come over?" He replied seconds later, "Yeah. See you soon." When he showed up, there was this quiet fragility about him. His usual easy smile was subdued, like he was carrying a weight he wasn't ready to set down. We sat down on the couch, the comforter I'd pulled out for him earlier still warm. I reached out, taking his hand, hoping to offer some silent reassurance. So I said gently, "What's going on?" He took a deep breath, looking anywhere but at me. "I've been offered a contract for a project in another city. It's a big opportunity, exactly the kind of thing I've been hoping for. But it means I might have to move, maybe sooner than we both thought." My heart sank, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "That's amazing, Matt." "You deserve it." He nodded, biting his lip. "Yeah, but it feels like it's coming out of nowhere, and I don't want this to mess up what we have." I squeezed his hand tighter. "We'll figure it out. Whatever happens, we'll make it work." But inside, the thought of him leaving, of the distance growing between us, felt like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Over the next few days, we talked about it nonstop. Plans, possibilities, fears. The idea of a long-distance thing scared the hell out of both of us, but neither wanted to shut the door completely. I remember one night, sitting on his floor, surrounded by takeout boxes and empty coffee mugs, when he turned to me and said, "I don't want to lose you. Not like this." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You won't." We promised to stay honest, to keep talking no matter what, even when it got hard. The last weekend before his move was bittersweet. We tried to pack in as many small moments as we could. Slow morning coffees, lazy afternoons at the park, that silly tradition we created where we'd find the weirdest ice cream flavors and dare each other to try them. Sunday night, sitting on the fire escape like that first quiet night, Matt pulled me close. "No matter where I go, you're coming with me in my head." I smiled, feeling the sting of impending distance, but also this fierce hope. "And you're in mine." When Monday morning rolled around, the apartment felt emptier than before. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was a new chapter, messy and uncertain, but ours. We kept video calls and late-night texts, sharing the small, mundane moments that stitch lives together. And though the miles stretched between us, the connection remained, a steady thread woven through the chaos. Sometimes, when I catch myself staring at my phone, waiting for his name to pop up, I think back to that night the storm cut the power and changed everything. Funny how a blackout can light the way, isn't it? Months passed, and the distance between Matt and me was real. Hundreds of miles, time zones, different routines. There were moments when the silence stretched too long, when the screen felt like a flimsy barrier between us, and I wondered if this was all just a beautiful experiment doomed to fizzle out. But then, other times, like late-night video calls where we'd laugh about the same dumb inside jokes or share our day's small victories, it was clear something deeper held us together. I won't pretend it was easy. There were frustrations, missed calls, the ache of not being able to reach out and touch the person who had become so important. But we kept at it, because what we had was rare and worth fighting for. We learned to be patient, to trust, to fill the gaps with honesty instead of assumptions. Then, one crisp autumn weekend, I found myself standing in a small airport, heart racing, like the night the storm knocked out the power. I was there because Matt was coming back, not just for a visit, but for good. His contract was ending, and he'd found a way to keep his work while living here with me. When he walked through that arrival gate, and I saw him, real, right in front of me, it felt like everything had aligned. We didn't need grand gestures or perfect timing. Just that simple reunion was enough to fill the spaces the distance had left behind. We walked out together, hands intertwined, the city's hum wrapping around us like a familiar song. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes love isn't about thunderous declarations or sweeping dramas. Sometimes it's about those quiet nights, the shared stories, the willingness to stay when things get messy. Matt looked at me, smiling that same shy grin, and said, "Feels good to be home." I squeezed his hand and smiled back. Yeah, feels right. The storm that brought us together wasn't some cosmic magic. It was just life, unpredictable and imperfect. But it made us slow down, see each other, and choose to take a chance. And honestly, I think that's all love really asks for.